Imagine taking 50 times the recommended dose of Datura, a hallucinogen known for its intense and horrifying effects. Our story follows someone who did just that, leading to a nightmarish journey into hell itself. If you think you can handle it, stick around and hear every chilling detail of this mind-bending, spine-tingling trip. This is not for the faint-hearted. I always considered myself brave when it came to experimenting with hallucinogens. I tried a variety of substances before, each one more intense than the last, and always emerged relatively unscathed. Stories of Datura's terrifying effects intrigued me, but I dismissed them as exaggerated. After all, how bad could it be? Datura had a reputation, sure, but I was confident that I could handle it. I was wrong, terribly, catastrophically wrong. It was a warm Saturday evening when my curiosity got the better of me. Alone in my apartment, I decided to take a 50x dose of Datura, far more than anyone had recommended. I wanted to push the boundaries, to see just how brave I really was. I set the stage with dim lights, soft music, and made sure I had water nearby, thinking I was prepared for whatever was to come. The effects began slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, it was just a slight buzzing in my ears and a feeling of heaviness in my limbs. I settled into my couch, feeling a strange, creeping unease that I brushed off as pre-trip jitters. But as the minutes ticked by, reality began to unravel in ways I could never have imagined. The walls of my apartment started to pulse and breathe, their colors shifting in and out of focus. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. When I looked down, I saw roots growing from my feet, anchoring me to the floor. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't move. My heart raced, and the whispers began, soft at first, then growing louder and more insistent. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but their tone was unmistakably sinister. The room darkened, and I found myself plunged into a realm of shadows and whispers. The air grew thick and cold, and I could feel unseen eyes watching me from every corner. Objects around me morphed into grotesque shapes, their forms twisting and contorting in ways that defied logic. The soft music I had put on warped into a cacophony of dissonant tones, each note clawing at my sanity. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a figure standing before me. It was a tall, gaunt man, dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothes. His eyes were hollow, and his smile was a twisted rictus of cruelty. He reached out with skeletal fingers and touched my forehead. Instantly, I was transported to another place. I found myself in a decrepit, abandoned mansion. The walls were lined with decaying portraits, whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. The air was thick with the scent of rot and mildew. I tried to find an exit, but every door led to another room, each more horrifying than the last. In one room, I saw a banquet table set with rotting food and skeletal guests. They turned their empty eye sockets towards me, their jaws opening in a silent scream. In another room, I encountered a mirror. My reflection stared back at me, but it was wrong, distorted and malevolent. My eyes were black pits, and my skin was covered in festering sores. The reflection began to speak, its voice a guttural whisper. "You cannot escape," it said. "This is your reality now." Desperation drove me to flee, but no matter how fast I ran, the mansion seemed endless. The walls closed in, and the whispers grew louder, merging into a deafening roar. I stumbled into a grand ballroom, where hundreds of ghostly figures danced in a macabre waltz. They turned to me in unison, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. One of them, a woman in a tattered gown, extended her hand to me. Her touch was icy cold, and I felt my soul being sucked into the void. I screamed and pulled away, only to find myself in complete darkness. The ground beneath me was soft and yielding, like a swamp. I could hear the distant croaking of frogs and the rustle of unseen creatures. Fear gripped me as I realized I was not alone. Shapes moved in the darkness, closing in on me. I felt hands grabbing at my legs, pulling me down into the muck. Just when I thought I would be swallowed by the darkness, I was yanked upwards. I found myself back in my apartment, but it was no longer a sanctuary. The shadows were deeper, the whispers louder, and the air filled with a sense of impending doom. I looked at the clock, but the hands were spinning wildly, time itself losing all meaning. The gaunt man reappeared, his hollow eyes fixed on me. "Welcome back," he said, his voice echoing in my mind. "You belong to us now." I tried to speak, to scream, but no sound came out. The walls began to close in, and the room grew smaller and smaller. The shadows reached out with grasping fingers, wrapping around me and pulling me into their depths. I felt my consciousness slipping away, drowning in a sea of darkness. When I finally came to, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the window, and the room was still. The effects of the Datura had worn off, but the terror lingered. It felt like hours had passed, but my clock showed only 10 minutes had gone by. As the hallucinations intensified, I found myself drawn to my apartment window. The city below looked strangely inviting, a stark contrast to the nightmare unfolding within my mind. The whispers urged me to go outside, to escape the confines of my apartment. In my altered state, I believed that jumping from the window would lead me to freedom. I managed to pull myself to the window, my movements sluggish and uncoordinated. The city lights blurred and swirled, creating a mesmerizing pattern that beckoned me closer. Just as I was about to climb onto the ledge, I felt a sudden force pulling me backward. I hit the floor hard, and the world around me dissolved into chaos. I was falling, tumbling through an abyss of darkness. The air grew hotter and thicker, filled with the acrid stench of sulfur and burning flesh. The whispers grew louder, now a cacophony of screams and maniacal laughter. I landed with a thud on a rough, fiery landscape. The ground beneath me was cracked and oozing with molten lava. I had entered hell. Demons of all shapes and sizes roamed the landscape, their eyes glowing with malevolence. They taunted me, their voices a twisted symphony of torment. The gaunt man reappeared, but now he was a towering figure with horns and wings, his eyes burning with a hellish fire. "Welcome to your new home," he said, his voice reverberating through the inferno. "You will suffer here for eternity." I tried to run, but the ground seemed to pull me back. Chains erupted from the earth, wrapping around my wrists and ankles, dragging me towards a massive, fiery pit. I screamed for help, but my voice was swallowed by the roar of the flames. As I was dragged closer to the pit, I saw the faces of other lost souls, their eyes filled with despair. They reached out to me, their hands grasping, but their touch only intensified my agony. The heat was unbearable, searing my skin and filling my lungs with smoke. The gaunt demon towered over me, his laugh echoing through the hellscape. "You will never escape," he said. "This is your fate, a punishment for your curiosity." The demons continued their torment, tearing at my flesh with claws and teeth. I could feel my body being ripped apart, yet I remained conscious, trapped in an endless cycle of pain. The landscape around me shifted and changed, each new scene more horrifying than the last. I saw rivers of blood, forests of twisted, screaming trees, and mountains of tortured souls writhing in agony. Just when I thought I could endure no more, the ground beneath me gave way, and I was plunged into an even deeper abyss. The darkness here was absolute, and the air was thick with despair. I floated aimlessly, lost in the void, until I saw a faint, flickering light in the distance. Desperate for any semblance of hope, I moved towards it. The light grew brighter, and I found myself in a vast, cavernous hall. In the center stood a throne made of bones, upon which sat a figure cloaked in shadow. The air crackled with malevolent energy as the figure rose and approached me. As it drew closer, I saw its true form, a monstrous being with multiple heads, each one representing a different aspect of my deepest fears. "You have entered the heart of hell," it said, its voice a chorus of torment. "Here, your worst nightmares will come to life, and you will be their plaything." I was cast into a series of nightmarish scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. I was buried alive, suffocated by the weight of the earth above me. I was chased by faceless creatures through endless corridors, their howls echoing in my ears. I was submerged in icy water, unable to breathe, as hands reached up from the depths to drag me down. Time lost all meaning. Each moment stretched into an eternity of suffering. I lost all sense of who I was, my mind fracturing under the relentless assault of fear and pain. I had become a prisoner of my own darkest imaginings, with no hope of escape. But then, in the midst of my despair, I heard a voice, a gentle, soothing voice calling my name. It cut through the cacophony of torment, drawing me towards it. I focused on the voice, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. With great effort, I forced myself to move towards the sound, each step a battle against the weight of my fears. The voice grew louder, more insistent. "You must wake up. This is not real. You can escape." It was a lifeline, and I clung to it desperately. The shadows around me began to recede, the hellish landscape dissolving into a hazy, indistinct mist. I felt a sudden jolt, as if I had been yanked from the depths of a dark ocean, and found myself back in my apartment, gasping for air. The room was bathed in the soft light of dawn. The horrors of the night seemed to fade, but the terror lingered, etched into my mind. I was drenched in sweat, my body trembling from the ordeal. The once familiar surroundings now felt alien and menacing, the echoes of my nightmare still whispering at the edges of my consciousness. I lay on the floor, trying to regain my bearings, but the room continued to shift and distort. The walls seemed to close in on me, the whispers still audible in the distance. I forced myself to focus on the mundane details around me, the texture of the carpet, the hum of the refrigerator, the light filtering through the curtains. Slowly, the hallucinations began to subside, and reality reasserted itself. As the effects of the Datura finally wore off, I was left with a profound sense of dread and an unshakable feeling that I had glimpsed something truly malevolent. The experience had shattered my confidence, leaving me vulnerable and afraid. I had flirted with forces beyond my understanding, and they had shown me the depths of my own fears. In the days that followed, I struggled to shake off the lingering effects of the trip. Sleep was elusive, and when it did come, it was filled with nightmares. The gaunt man, the twisted mansion, the fiery pit of hell, all haunted my dreams. I became hyper-aware of shadows, convinced that they held secrets and dangers just out of sight. The experience left me questioning my own sanity. I sought solace in the company of friends, but even they seemed distant and unreal. The world around me had changed, colored by the darkness I had encountered. I found myself avoiding reflective surfaces, terrified that my own distorted reflection would speak to me again. Desperation drove me to seek help. I reached out to a therapist, someone who could help me make sense of the nightmare I had endured. Through our sessions, I began to understand that the Datura had unlocked a door in my mind, releasing my deepest fears and anxieties. It would take time and effort to heal, to rebuild the walls that had been torn down. To anyone considering trying Datura, I offer this warning. It is not a drug to be taken lightly. The mind is a fragile thing, and once broken, it can never be fully mended. Some trips lead to places from which you may never fully return. My journey into hell was a sobering reminder of the dangers of tampering with powerful substances. I thought I was brave, but I was merely reckless, and I paid the price. If you value your sanity, heed my cautionary tale. Some doors should never be opened, and some paths should never be taken. The bravest thing you can do is to respect the unknown and avoid the temptation to push beyond the limits of human experience.